The flickering blue light of a laptop screen illuminated Marcus Chen's face at 2:47 a.m. He had been scrolling through endless self-help videos, each promising transformation, each delivering disappointment. His last performance review echoed in his mind: lacks executive presence, his manager had said. Needs more confidence in leadership situations. But this video was different. The title alone made him pause: The Prince's Confidence, Why Machiavelli Understood Power Better Than Your Self-Help Guru. What Marcus discovered in those 43 minutes would fundamentally alter his understanding of confidence, power, and human nature itself. The video didn't promise gentle affirmations or visualization exercises. Instead, it offered something far more potent: the strategic mindset that had toppled kingdoms and built empires. The creator, who went by the strategic mind, began with a simple premise that shattered conventional wisdom: true confidence isn't about feeling good about yourself. It's about understanding the game so deeply that you become unshakable in your position. Machiavelli didn't write The Prince to make friends. He wrote it to reveal the mechanisms of power that most people are too naive to see. Marcus leaned forward as the video unveiled its first principle: confidence isn't an emotion, it's a strategic position. For 5 centuries, people had misunderstood Niccolò Machiavelli as a villain who advocated manipulation and cruelty. But the video revealed a different truth: Machiavelli was the first modern analyst of power dynamics, the first person to strip away the comforting illusions and examine how influence actually works in human societies. The video's narrator explained that most people approach confidence backwards. They try to build it from the inside out, working on their self-esteem, practicing positive self-talk, hoping that internal changes will somehow manifest external results. But Machiavelli understood something profound: confidence is a function of position, not personality. When you understand your strategic position relative to others, when you see the hidden dynamics that govern human interaction, when you recognize the patterns that most people remain blind to, that's when unshakable confidence emerges. Marcus found himself taking notes as the video dissected the first component of Machiavellian confidence: situational awareness. The presenter used historical examples, showing how Cesare Borgia could walk into any room and immediately assess who held real power, who had hidden agendas, who could be trusted, and who needed to be managed. This wasn't supernatural intuition, it was systematic analysis. Every human interaction operates on multiple levels, the video explained. There's the surface conversation: what people say they want, what they claim to believe. Then, there's the interest layer: what people actually want, their real motivations and fears. Finally, there's the power layer: who can actually deliver what, who has leverage over whom, who stands to gain or lose from any particular outcome. The video demonstrated this with a workplace scenario that made Marcus's stomach tighten with recognition. A department meeting where everyone ostensibly discusses quarterly goals, but the real conversation involves territorial disputes, budget allocations, and career advancement opportunities. While most people engage only with the surface layer, the Machiavellian observer maps all 3 levels simultaneously. Marcus paused the video and looked around his small apartment. How many interactions had he fumbled because he'd been operating on only the surface level? How many opportunities had he missed because he hadn't recognized the real dynamics at play? The video resumed with its second principle: strategic positioning. Machiavelli argued that power isn't something you have, it's something you do. It's not a possession but a relationship. Understanding this distinction transforms how you approach every interaction. Instead of asking, "How can I be more confident?" you ask, "How can I position myself strategically in this situation?" The video broke down Machiavelli's concept of virtue, not virtue in the moral sense, but effectiveness in pursuing objectives. A person with virtue doesn't rely on luck, external validation, or the goodwill of others. They create favorable conditions through strategic action. They understand that reputation is a tool, that perception often matters more than reality, and that timing can be more important than talent. Marcus watched, transfixed, as the video outlined specific strategies. The art of selective vulnerability, revealing carefully chosen weaknesses to build trust while concealing actual disadvantages. The power of strategic unpredictability, being reliable in your commitments but unpredictable in your methods, keeping others slightly off balance so they can't manipulate you easily. The importance of multiple options, never allowing yourself to be dependent on any single person, outcome, or opportunity. The historical examples were compelling, but the modern applications were revolutionary. The video showed how these principles apply to job interviews, salary negotiations, romantic relationships, social dynamics, and career advancement. It wasn't about becoming manipulative or cruel, it was about becoming strategically intelligent. As the video entered its second section, Marcus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented, a systematic deconstruction of social dynamics that most people never consciously examine. The presenter introduced Machiavelli's most controversial insight, the disconnect between how the world actually works and how people pretend it works. Society runs on beautiful lies, the video explained. We tell ourselves that hard work always pays off, that good people finish first, that truth and justice naturally prevail. These beliefs serve important social functions, but they're strategically naive. Machiavelli looked at what actually happens, not what should happen. This led to the video's most powerful section, the analysis of social proof and authority dynamics. Machiavelli observed that people rarely form independent judgments. Instead, they take cues from others about what to think, how to behave, and whom to respect. This creates opportunities for those who understand the mechanism. Marcus watched examples of how this played out in modern contexts. A startup founder who positioned himself as an industry expert not through actual expertise, but by consistently sharing insights that other experts would later validate. A junior employee who gained influence by becoming the unofficial information hub in her department, making herself indispensable not through technical skills but through strategic relationship building. The video emphasized that this wasn't about deception, it was about understanding how social systems actually function. Most people wait for external validation before acting confidently. But confident people understand that validation often follows confidence, not the other way around. They create the conditions for their own validation. The third component of Machiavellian confidence involved what the video called emotional sovereignty. Machiavelli wrote about the importance of controlling your own emotional state regardless of external circumstances. Not because emotions are bad, but because emotional reactivity is a strategic vulnerability. Marcus thought about his last team meeting, how his manager's criticism had sent him spiraling into self-doubt for days. The video suggested a different approach, treating feedback as information rather than judgment, viewing challenges as data points rather than personal attacks. This wasn't about becoming emotionless, it was about maintaining strategic clarity even under pressure. The video demonstrated this through historical analysis of how Machiavelli himself handled adversity. When the Medici family returned to power and dismantled everything he'd worked for, Machiavelli didn't collapse into bitterness or self-pity. He analyzed what had happened, identified the strategic lessons, and used his exile to write works that would influence human thinking for centuries. He transformed defeat into intellectual victory through emotional sovereignty. The presenter then revealed something that made Marcus sit up straight. Most people's confidence problems stem from fundamental misunderstandings about human nature. They believe that people are basically rational, that good intentions matter most, that fairness is a natural principle. But Machiavelli saw deeper patterns. People are driven by a complex mix of rational calculations, emotional needs, social pressures, and unconscious biases. They want to see themselves as good people, so they'll rationalize their self-interested decisions as moral choices. They crave security and status, so they'll support systems and leaders that promise these things, regardless of the actual likelihood of delivery. They fear uncertainty, so they'll often choose familiar problems over unfamiliar solutions. Understanding these patterns doesn't make you cynical, it makes you effective. When you stop expecting people to behave according to idealized models and start working with actual human psychology, you become infinitely more capable of achieving positive outcomes. The video's second section concluded with practical applications of these insights. How to read a room by observing who defers to whom, who interrupts whom, who makes eye contact with whom. How to position your ideas so they align with people's existing interests rather than challenging their preconceptions. How to build alliances based on mutual benefit rather than mere goodwill. Marcus found himself thinking differently about his upcoming project presentation. Instead of focusing solely on the technical merits of his proposal, he began considering the political dimensions. Who stood to benefit from his recommendations? Who might feel threatened? How could he frame his ideas to address the real concerns of decision makers, not just their stated objectives? As the video transitioned into its final section, the tone shifted. The presenter acknowledged the ethical questions that arise when you begin to see social dynamics this clearly. Some viewers might worry about becoming manipulative or losing their authenticity. But the video argued for a different perspective: ethical Machiavellianism. True Machiavellian thinking isn't about exploitation, it's about effectiveness. When you understand how power works, you can use that knowledge to create positive outcomes more efficiently. When you see through social facades, you can build more genuine relationships based on real understanding rather than mutual self-deception. When you develop emotional sovereignty, you become more reliable and trustworthy because you're not constantly reactive to external pressures. The video presented case studies of leaders who had applied these principles ethically. A nonprofit director who used strategic thinking to navigate bureaucratic obstacles and deliver better services to her community. A teacher who understood classroom dynamics well enough to create learning environments where every student could thrive. An entrepreneur who built successful businesses by aligning his interests with those of his customers and employees rather than exploiting them. The key insight was that Machiavellian principles are tools, not values. How you use them depends on your underlying objectives. If your goal is to create value, build meaningful relationships, and contribute positively to the world, then strategic thinking becomes a way to achieve those goals more effectively. If your goal is exploitation and domination, then these tools become weapons. The choice is yours. Marcus paused the video again, feeling something shift in his understanding. He'd always thought of confidence as something mysterious, something that some people naturally possessed while others struggled without it. But the video was revealing confidence as a learnable skill set based on systematic understanding of human dynamics. The final section introduced what the presenter called the prince's paradox. Machiavelli observed that those who appear most confident often feel most secure in their positions, while those who seem insecure often are actually in precarious situations. But he also noted that excessive confidence can lead to strategic blindness, while appropriate insecurity can drive continuous learning and adaptation. The solution to this paradox lay in developing what Machiavelli called prudent boldness, the ability to act decisively while remaining open to new information, to project confidence while continuously refining your understanding, to take calculated risks while maintaining strategic flexibility. The video demonstrated this through analysis of historical figures who had mastered this balance. Leaders who could inspire others with their vision while privately acknowledging uncertainty, negotiators who could project strength while genuinely considering their opponents' perspectives, innovators who could pursue ambitious goals while adapting their methods based on feedback. Marcus realized this was exactly what he'd been missing in his professional life. He'd been so focused on appearing confident that he'd become rigid, so afraid of showing uncertainty that he'd stopped learning from feedback, so concerned with being liked that he'd avoided making necessary but unpopular decisions. The video then revealed its most practical insight. Confidence isn't about having all the answers, it's about being comfortable with the process of finding answers. When you understand how human systems work, when you've developed skills for reading situations and positioning yourself strategically, when you've cultivated emotional sovereignty, you don't need to know what's going to happen. You know you can handle whatever does happen. This led to specific exercises and practices for developing Machiavellian confidence. Daily situation analysis, where you observe interactions around you and practice identifying the multiple layers of communication and interest. Strategic positioning exercises, where you consciously consider your position relative to others in various contexts and look for opportunities to improve it. Emotional sovereignty practices, where you work on maintaining strategic clarity under pressure. But the video emphasized that these weren't manipulation techniques, they were awareness and effectiveness tools. The goal wasn't to control others but to understand systems well enough to navigate them successfully while maintaining your integrity and pursuing your genuine objectives. As the video approached its conclusion, Marcus felt as though he'd been given a new lens through which to view the world. The people around him hadn't changed, but his understanding of their behavior had deepened dramatically. The situations that had previously seemed chaotic or unfair now revealed underlying patterns and logic. The presenter offered final thoughts on what he called the dangerous part of this knowledge. Once you begin to see these dynamics clearly, you can't unsee them. Once you understand how social proof works, you'll notice it everywhere. Once you recognize the gap between people's stated motivations and their actual interests, you'll spot it constantly. Once you develop emotional sovereignty, you'll become less reactive to the emotional manipulations that work on most people. This knowledge is dangerous because it sets you apart from those who remain unconscious of these dynamics. You'll find yourself less impressed by status displays, less manipulated by emotional appeals, less dependent on external validation. Some people will find this threatening because it means their usual influence tactics won't work on you. But the video argued that this danger is actually a form of liberation. When you're no longer subject to unconscious manipulation, when you can see through social facades, when you understand your strategic position in any situation, you become truly free to choose your responses based on your actual values and objectives rather than being unconsciously driven by social pressures. The video ended with Machiavelli's most profound insight, one that Marcus would carry with him long after the laptop screen went dark: everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. The path to dangerous self-confidence isn't about changing who you are, it's about understanding the game well enough to present yourself strategically while remaining true to your core values and objectives. As the final credits rolled, Marcus sat in silence for several minutes. The apartment around him looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted in his perception. He thought about his upcoming performance review, his stalled promotion prospects, his tendency to defer to others in meetings. For the first time, he saw these challenges not as reflections of some inherent inadequacy, but as strategic problems with identifiable solutions. He opened a new document on his laptop and began writing. Not affirmations or goals, but analysis. Who were the key decision makers in his organization? What were their actual interests and concerns? How could he position himself to be more valuable to them while pursuing his own career objectives? What alliances could he build? What skills could he develop that would give him more strategic leverage? The questions flowed naturally now, guided by the framework the video had provided. Marcus realized he was no longer asking, "How can I feel more confident?" but rather, "How can I become more strategically effective?" The shift in focus was subtle but revolutionary. Over the following weeks, Marcus began applying what he'd learned. He started paying closer attention to the dynamics in meetings, noticing who deferred to whom, who had real decision-making authority versus who just had impressive titles. He began positioning his ideas differently, framing them in terms of solutions to problems that key stakeholders actually cared about rather than abstract improvements. Most importantly, he stopped waiting for external validation before acting confidently. He began contributing more substantively to discussions, not because he felt more confident, but because he understood that confidence often follows action rather than preceding it. He started building relationships strategically, not manipulatively but thoughtfully, identifying people whose interests aligned with his and finding ways to create mutual value. The results were dramatic. Within 2 months, he was invited to lead a high-visibility project. Within 4 months, his manager was asking for his input on strategic decisions. Within 6 months, he was offered the promotion he'd been hoping for. But, perhaps most significantly, Marcus noticed that his relationship to confidence itself had changed. He no longer thought about it as something he either had or lacked. Instead, he saw it as an ongoing practice of strategic awareness, positioning, and emotional sovereignty. Some days he felt more certain than others, but his effectiveness no longer depended on those feelings. The video had promised to teach dangerous self-confidence, and it had delivered. Marcus was now dangerous not because he'd become manipulative or cruel, but because he could no longer be easily manipulated, dismissed, or controlled. He understood the game, and that understanding had set him free. Months later, Marcus would share the video with a colleague who was struggling with similar challenges. As they watched together, Marcus realized something profound: the knowledge itself wasn't dangerous, remaining ignorant of these dynamics was what was truly dangerous. When you don't understand how power works, how social proof functions, how human psychology actually operates, you remain vulnerable to those who do understand these things. The video hadn't taught him to become a different person. It had taught him to see clearly, think strategically, and act effectively while remaining true to his values. In a world full of people operating on autopilot, driven by unconscious social pressures and emotional reactions, the person who thinks clearly and acts strategically has an enormous advantage. That advantage isn't unfair, it's available to anyone willing to study human nature honestly, practice strategic thinking consistently, and develop the emotional sovereignty necessary to navigate complex social dynamics with integrity. The video had simply provided a systematic framework for developing these capabilities. As Marcus watched his colleague's eyes widen with recognition during the section on situational awareness, he smiled. Another person was about to discover the difference between hoping for confidence and strategically developing it. Another person was about to become dangerously self-confident in the best possible way. The video's final message echoed in Marcus's mind: confidence isn't about feeling superior to others. It's about understanding the game well enough that you can play it effectively while maintaining your integrity. When you see clearly, think strategically, and act purposefully, you become unshakable not because nothing can touch you, but because you know you can handle whatever comes. This was the secret Machiavelli had understood 500 years ago, the insight that had been obscured by centuries of moral condemnation and misinterpretation. Power isn't about domination, it's about effectiveness. Confidence isn't about feeling good, it's about strategic clarity. And wisdom isn't about having all the answers, it's about understanding how to find them. The laptop screen dimmed automatically as Marcus leaned back in his chair, a different person than he'd been when he first clicked play. The transformation hadn't been magical or mysterious. It had been systematic, strategic, and profound. He'd learned to see the matrix of human interaction that had always been there, waiting for those with eyes to see it. In 43 minutes, one video had accomplished what years of traditional self-help had failed to deliver. Not by making Marcus feel better about himself, but by teaching him to think more clearly about the world around him. Not by boosting his self-esteem, but by developing his strategic intelligence. Not by promising easy answers, but by providing powerful questions. The dangerous self-confidence that Machiavelli understood wasn't about becoming someone else, it was about becoming fully yourself in a world that finally made sense. And that, Marcus realized as he finally closed the laptop and headed to bed, was the most dangerous transformation of all.